to my channel Coder Koala with another interesting Python lesson. Today we'll try to understand how the range function in Python, which is mostly used in for loop, works. So let's dive right in. So you must have noticed while writing for loops in Python, we usually go by for I in range and then we put some number, say 5, and then if we want to print the values of I, we just put I in this print statement and we run. And you can see each of the values of I is printed. But it's a little different than how we write loops, how we write for loops in languages like Java, C++, and C. So let's just look how they go by. So yeah, in Java we do something like this. So if I run this, I'm going to get the same output 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And here what I'm doing is I'm initializing the loop control variable I equal to 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. So something like this. In C++ also, you see the for loop is written in a very similar fashion to Java, and so is in C. Okay, and it's generating the same output. And also you can see at the bottom of my screen in the uh, Chrome Dev Tools, you can see in the console, I have written the for loop for JavaScript. So very similar in Java, C++, C, JavaScript, but a little different in Python. We use the range function instead. So the range function accepts not only one parameter, it can also accept two parameters. So when I try to run this with two parameters, it goes up to 14. And if I try to run, we can also put a third parameter. So yeah, but how is this thing working? Let's try to understand what's happening. Okay, so we can write, as I said, the range function with just one value. So when it is just one value, Python considers this as the stop value. Okay, so when it's just the one value, Python considers it to be the stop value, and it considers the start. So by default, it considers the start to be 0, and the step count, that is how many counts you're going to take to go to the next value, is 1. So by default it considers, so when we are just passing one value, Python considers the start to be 0 and the step count to be 1. Okay, so this is set by default. So if you go back to this, if I just have 5, and if the, if we are just saying 5, so by default it is, yeah, so it starts from 0 and the step count is 1, so it's going increasing by 1, and it is not printing 5 because whatever is the stop value, that value is always exclusive in Python. Okay, so the stop value is exclusive, so it's going to go up to the value which is less than the stop value. Okay, now next is when we are passing two parameters to the range function, then what is happening? So when I'm saying range, 5 comma 15, so in this case the first value becomes start and the last value becomes stop, and by default the step count is 1. So if I do 5 to 15, then it's gonna print 5 to 14. So let's see. So I is going to take up the value 5 to 14, as you can see in the output. Now let's see what happens when there are three parameters to the range function. So we can write range, we can have 5, 15, 3. So, of course, I'll just scroll up a bit. Of course, the first value is definitely start. The next value is stop. And what is the third value? The third value is the step count. So here the user is telling Python interpreter or the Python compiler what all values to take up for start, stop, and step count. So there is no the interpreter is not choosing anything by default. So what would this mean? This means that so it would start at 5, right? It would start at 5, and the next value would be step count is 3, so it would be 8. So 5 plus 3 is 8, and the next value 8 plus 3 11, and then 11 plus 3 14. And it won't go after that because the stop is 15, so we will go uh, up to the value which is less than 15, because the stop is always exclusive, as we just said. So let's go back and see how this happens. So when I put the step count as 3, this is what I get: 5, 8, 11, 14, as I had just said here. And do you know what this process is called? So this process where the function name is same, but the different numbers of parameters are being passed in every time. So this type of process is called as function overloading. You can see what this range function essentially is doing is it's creating an iterable. It creates a sequence of numbers that the for loop can iterate over. That's all the range function is doing. So the range function is mostly used with the for loop in Python. Another very rare use case of the range function would be in slicing lists, but that's a very rare use case. It's mostly used with the for loop in Python.